Hello and welcome to Unstress. I'm Dr Ron Ehrlich. My guest today is the legendary Dr Bruce Lipton. Bruce's background is cell biology. He has a PhD in cell biology. Appropriate in many ways as they are the building blocks of nature, and as a starting point, it's a good place to begin. Bruce has written many books. His 2003 book, The Biology of Belief, is one which I would definitely include on my must-read books. What I loved about it is his explanation of the emerging and empowering science of epigenetics. That is, your thoughts, here's an example of what we're talking about. Your thoughts are things. They are actual proteins called neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, which attach to cell membranes and cause your genes to express themselves. And that expression, that gene expression, is inheritable over the next few generations. So you are not a victim to your genes. You have some control over how they are expressed. And the same, and I personally found that enlightening and empowering. And for me, it was just profound. And I wanted to share this with you. And really the same is true for nutrients and environmental toxins, but that's the subject for another podcast. When I was in high school, I didn't really like physics. And when the subject of quantum physics came up, well, I was lost. But another thing I love about Bruce Lipton is he explains the relevance to us on a daily basis of Newtonian and quantum physics. That's a big call, but it's also empowering. In this episode, we cover history from French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes to Isaac Newton and on to Albert Einstein. We talk about matter and energy. We talk about material, mechanical and physical world that we see, and the other world, energy, spirit and mind, which we don't see always. We talk about the conscious and the unconscious mind. If you thought seeing is believing, you may want to rethink that one. We cover so much territory here, and Bruce is a powerhouse. So knowledgeable, so passionate, so empowering. So listen carefully. You may want to listen to it again. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Bruce Lipton. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Ron, thank you so very much for this opportunity. I'm so excited to be here and talk with you, and especially your audience. We know there's chaos in the world. It seems like everything's going crazy, but underneath there's an event that's happening, and we're going through an evolution. And so your audience really represents what are called the cultural creatives. They're looking for answers outside the box, because to get through this period of time, the conventional answers are failing us, and there's a new world, a new science, and I'm so excited to be here with you to discuss it.
Thank you so much. And I know before we came on, we were just reflecting on the state of the world at the moment. And I think we both agreed that engagement, getting involved, taking control, being part of the solution rather than reflecting just on all the problems is a really key, important point. And to that effect, you have been a great source of inspiration, I know, to me and also many people. I wanted to cover a few things here because you talk and write about so many things, and we're going to have links to all of those later. But, people we seem to be taking a very mechanistic view of things, health-wise, certainly. The body's compartmentalized into all these specialties, and we seem to be taking a very compartmentalized view of the world. Can you reflect on how we got to that point and how we might move on?
Yeah, it's actually an ancient history in our sense of time right now. It goes back to the 1700s, late 1700s. And this is a time when the church was running civilization. And the belief, of course, was that God and spirit, these invisible forces were controlling life. And at this time, anybody who thought different than that would go through the Inquisition, which was a kangaroo court for you Aussies, in a sense that if you got convicted of being a heretic, there was no way you were going to escape punishment. And they punished anybody who thought outside the box. Well, this was really difficult for scientists because as soon as they found something that didn't agree with what the Bible said, they were by definition heretics. So science was really repressed. But Isaac Newton came up with an understanding of the universe, which simply represented this. He said, actually, let's go about 100 years before Newton, and we have Rene Descartes. And he comes up with the concept of a mind body. And so that becomes part of our intellectual thinking. There's a mind and there's a body. But he's also, interesting point was at the time of when he was alive, that's when they invented mechanical clocks. And the concept of all these gears turning and telling time really reflected on him when he looked up at the heavens above, and he said, you can tell time by the movements of these planets and these stars. So it's like, to him, all of a sudden, the idea that the universe is a mechanism was very appealing. He looked at it and said, so it's mechanical. Well, this is obviously not in the tradition of the church, which is everything is spiritual, and he was looking at mechanical. But there was nobody to follow it until Newton, about 100 years later, started to consider the idea that the planets and things moving around were indeed an expression of mechanics. And so what was real interesting is to understand the nature of these movements. And nobody really recognized this. Before he could do anything in the world of physics, the first thing he developed, and people, I said, don't even recognize it, is calculus. He had to create the mathematics of calculus in order to measure the movements of the different planets in the sky. And he creates calculus, and then he puts the data in about the planets that he could observe, how big the planet is, how fast it's moving, and the arc that it's moving in. And he put these physical parameters into his equation, and he was able to predict the movements of the planets and the stars, in fact, like it was a clock, and it's a mechanism. And what was very important about Newton is that he didn't put God or spirit into his equation. It's just mechanical stuff. So at that point, it became a concept that the physical world in which we live, and the planets and all the things, and us and everything material, was part of a mechanical, material, physical world, and it was separate from an invisible world. And it said, okay, there's an invisible world, and there's a mechanical world. Well, we can observe and work with the mechanical world. The invisible world, we have nothing to do with it. And so this is the first separation of what you call physics from metaphysics. Physics said we study the physical body. Metaphysics is we study the energy and all that. So that separation allowed science to operate independently of the church, because it said, oh, spirit and God, oh, that we don't deal with that. That's for God and church. And they left that alone, including mind, which was part of that invisible stuff. Mind's invisible. And they put that all aside and said it's not part of our science, because it's not mechanical, it's not physical, it's energy, and we don't need to have energy in the equation because we can see how the universe moves without energy in the equation. So there was a separation of the universe into two realms, matter and energy. Anything made out of matter would only be affected by other forms of matter, and energy could affect energy, but there was no body or matter-energy connection at all. So the first part of science took out all energy and invisible forces, and including spirit, out of the equation, saying it's not relevant. And medicine then tried to understand the nature of the human body, only looking at it as a mechanical machine made out of physical parts. And if there was something wrong with it, you can adjust the parts, chemicals, drugs, and fix the machine. So we took energy totally out of the equation as not being relevant, which of course includes mind and consciousness. And so we come into a world of the world that we're creating today, which is based on that science, which is actually referred to as scientific materialism, meaning the science of the physical mechanical universe, which is separate, of course, from the energy. So trying to understand the body means that you don't need to bring in God, spirit, mind, and consciousness. You just need to understand the physical chemicals. Well, of course, this was a separation of a universe into two realms. But in 1925, physics had changed its belief system. Up to about 1895, the mechanical vision of the Newtonian world said atoms, and the name atom came from the Greek word uncuttable. atom, uncuttable, meant the smallest particle in the universe. So they recognized there were these little particles like sand grains that are very small called atoms, and there were different kinds of atoms. And when you assemble them like a recipe, you can make a cake or a pie, depending on how you assemble these atoms. They said that's how the universe is created. Atoms are assembled into all these different arrangements that we see. And yet, what happened was in 1895, science found out there was something inside the atom. So it wasn't the smallest thing. There was something inside. They found electrons, protons, and neutrons, these small particles. They said, oh, okay, the atom is now made like a little solar system with a nucleus of protons and neutrons and electrons like planets flying all around. And that was the vision of the atom that they created. And then by around 1910, 1920, for sure, they also found out, well, what are those particles made out of? What's a proton made out of? What's a neutron made out of? And they had the opportunity to go smaller. And then the biggest surprise was as they went into the particle and went deeper, they found there was no matter inside the particle. It was energy. There's nothing physical. It is the appearance of physicality. That an atom is made out of energy units, and these energy units are like, let's say cyclone or tornado, spinning forces, very forces, and that the atom had no structure inside. It was only our illusion or perception of it as being physical that we see physicality in that sense. And it's interesting because Einstein, when he wrote, he said, matter is an illusion, albeit a permanent illusion, in the sense that he actually calls it persistent. Matter is a persistent illusion. The belief that world is made out of matter, and you say, well, wait, look, wherever you are right now, you're sitting down or standing up, you're in a building, there's trees and things all around. You go, well, look at all these physical things. And I go, the illusion. And I go, here's what the illusion is all about. The atoms are like tornadoes. They're force fields. There's nothing physical in them. They're just like energy winds, and they create pressure, okay? But they also create an energy field. And I say, well, why is it relevant? Because when the light is on, when there's light, the photons of light, which are little particles of light, bounce off the surface of what we perceive as matter. So that the energy that the matter is made out of is, you can't see the energy. What you see are the photons of light bouncing back. So in other words, you can't see anybody when it's dark because there's no photons. And when there are photons, all you're seeing is reflection of the photons from the light source coming back to your eye. But under that veneer of photons, there's no physical structure. So everything you see is a reflection of light bouncing back. It's an illusion of light that is creating the appearance of matter. But underneath that light, there's nothing physical. And then people will go, okay, wait, there's nothing physical, but even in the dark, I could feel you. In the dark, I can touch things. So there must be something physical because it's in the dark, I can feel it. And then I go, well, here's the point. If there's a tornado and you try to push your way through a tornado, the fact is that, well, that'd be silly. Tornado picks up houses and cars and throws them up in the air. There's a force. I say, why is it relevant? If the force pushes against you, it feels solid. If you can push against the force, it feels softer. So basically, everything that we feel that is hard, the wall, the trees, physical things, they're hard because the little tornado force fields that make up the atoms are so powerful, like tornadoes, that you can't push through them. They push back. And so, again, what's the point? We created an illusion that there's a physical world and an energy world. And in the beginning, we said they don't even interact with each other. Then we find out in quantum physics, and that's where the new physics came from, that said, wait, it's not matter at all. It's all energy. And the relevance about that then makes something very important. Matter, if pieces are made out of matter, I can separate A from B and say, look at piece A and separate it from piece B. I go, that's true. That's the illusion of that. And I go, it's the illusion because the atoms are energy fields, and energy fields don't have any borders to them. So wherever you're sitting right now, There are cell phone broadcasts, radio broadcasts, TV broadcasts, if you're on the computer, broadcast coming into the room right now. And all of it is energy. And it's like, you can't separate them. And I say, well, why is it relevant? Well, everything that has the appearance of matter is energy. And by definition, it's connected to everything else that's energy. And so we're in a matrix of energy. And this becomes profoundly important because there's an illusion of separation, but nothing is really separated because everything is an energy field. It's like a giant lake, and the rain is pouring down and the ripples are spreading all over the lake. But the point is, each ripple set is derived from a raindrop hitting the water. But if you look at the lake, the ripples are all merging with each other, connected. The whole point is the energy reveals a wholeness, and that is so profoundly different than Newtonian physics, which represents a duality of two non-interacting structures. We find everything is always interacting. Everything is from one. Everything is energy. It's invisible. And you say, I can see the physical stuff. And I say, yeah, but you know what? You radiate energy, and you can see it with certain kinds of microscopy, like all the new energy scans, like CAT scans, MRI scans, PET scans, these high-tech energy scans, what they use for medicine. They're not cameras that take pictures of things. They read energy fields. So they look at the body, and by looking at the energy fields can determine the characteristics of a cancer versus a normal body cell because they have different energies. So all of a sudden I say, guess what? Medicine, which was so fixated on the physical body as a machine made out of chemicals and genes and all that, is now using a technology that says I can read the body's functions, not through the matter, but by reading energy scans of the body. And I go, yeah, the energy is the core of what we are.
It's interesting, Bruce, isn't it, that we have accepted energy as a physical reality around it, as you say, all the time, and we're surrounded by it with phones, our TVs, everything we do, we're accepting energy. But philosophically, this is part of the problem, isn't it? That philosophically we're still caught in this Newtonian, seeing is believing. Touching, right. And that's part of the problem. We're almost there because we've accepted it on so many different levels. But philosophically, we haven't, as a country, as individuals, a lot of individuals have. Obviously, those that have been listening to you for many years have. But we haven't quite got there as a nation, as a community, as a world.
No, it is a very difficult, as Einstein said, all matter is an illusion, albeit a persistent illusion. The problem is, if we stay in the illusion, then we see ourselves as individuals separate from each other, with all the different physical things in our world separate from each other, that we're just a piece in a machine. And what that does is it devalues who we are. That we are actually not just a piece of the machine. Our energy is spreading out through the universe. So each one of us is a unique vibrational tuning fork. There are no two people with the same vibration. Each one of us is broadcasting a vibrational frequency. I say, well, wait, if matter is made out of energy and frequency and we broadcast frequency, then that means we can influence matter. And now here comes like the most important point, and yet one of the hardest, as you just mentioned, Ron, the hardest to accept, and that is this. Quantum physics acknowledges as a fact, and let me emphasize about quantum physics, it is the most valid, truthful science on the planet. There is no science with more validity in its understanding of the universe than quantum physics. So if you're going to question a science, you can question everyone, but quantum physics is the primo what's happening universe picture. I say, why is it relevant? And the answer is this. And as I said, matter is an illusion of energy. And quantum physicists, and I'm going to emphasize it again, since 1925, 1930, have told us that one of the quotes is from one of the early physicists, said, we've been used to looking at the universe as a giant machine, but in truth, it's more like a giant thought. That consciousness, the energy of our consciousness, is forming the energy of the world in which we live. And it's like, wait a minute. It says, we are creating through consciousness the world experience that you're having right now. This is a fact of physics. In fact, there's a quote I use in my lectures on one of the slides, and it's from an article in the journal Nature. So let me tell you, Nature is one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. So it's science pure. And there was an article from a physicist in the U.S. at Johns Hopkins University, a quantum physicist, and the article was about the nature of that there's energy. It's not matter, it's energy. And I show on the slide the final sentence of this paper in the scientific journal from quantum physics, and the sentence says this: the universe is immaterial. It's mental and spiritual. Live and enjoy.
Say it again. Go on, give it to us again. The universe is
immaterial, not physical. The universe is immaterial. It's mental and spiritual. Live and enjoy. And what does it come down to? The truth of the world, from whether the biology I talk about is how our consciousness shapes our physical biology and our behavior. And physics takes it even further because it says the whole expression of this universe is coming from consciousness.
Now, Bruce, this is a beautiful segue because we're going to come back to that, because another thing that I wanted to ask you about was that we think that our genes determine our destiny. You know, this is another theme that we kind of have come to accept in this physical, you call it the scientific materialistic world, that our genes are our destiny. But that's not the case. And I couldn't think of a better person to ask this question. What is the reality? What is this term called epigenetics?
Well, let's get the terms down because then we can work with it more easily. Genetics is the belief that we've all been programmed, the science of genetics, which is the science of genes and how genes create the characteristics of the body, and then how it was also extended to include not just our physical traits, but our emotional traits and our behavioral traits were all relegated to the action of genes. And I say, well, what? Genes are these physical DNA molecules that they're like blueprints. And why is this relevant? Well, the first thing is this: if you attribute the characters of your life to your genes, and the genes are presumably turning on and off, that's why we always say a gene turned on, a gene turned off, and it does so on its own. And I say, well, why is it relevant? Because I said, well, then the genes are making the control, and we don't control the genes. And so all of a sudden it says, well, wait, then if the genes are making the decisions, and I can't change the genes, then I am, and this is the important word, a victim of my heredity. I'm getting traits from genes that apparently came from my mother and my father, mixing the traits together, and that these traits controlled by genes can then control the character of my life. And I say, oh my God, then what we are saying, if you believe in genetic control, is that you are a victim of your heredity. You got cancer running in your family. It's like, oh my God, I have the gene for cancer. I can get the cancer or Alzheimer's or cardiovascular disease or whatever. We start to attribute that I'm a victim to these genes. And so we disempower people, because if you're out there and you go, oh my God, this gene could turn on and get cancer and I can't control the gene, it's like, I'm a victim. I go, okay, that is genetic control. Your life is under the control of your genes. But work since, I started 50 years ago on this, and in 1990, the new science was introduced, and it's called not genetic control, but epigenetic control. And you go, well, it sounds like the same thing. I go, it's a revolution. The revolution between genetics and epigenetics is as powerful as the evolution from Newtonian physics to quantum physics. It changes the world. I go, well, okay, wait, what does it mean? Epi, the prefix epi, means above. So when you say in Latin, what's the name of skin? You say, oh, epidermis. Oh, yeah, so what does that mean? Well, dermis is the layer of connective tissue and blood vessels below the skin. And so epidermis, by definition, says above the skin. Above the dermis. Epidermis, above the dermis. So I go, okay, what does epigenetic control mean? Epi means above. And I say, Epigenetic control translates as control above the genes. I go, wait a minute, the genes aren't in control. I said, no, what's the control above the genes? And basically, it's the environment. And this becomes really important because if the environment is controlling us, then we can continue to survive in an environment that is always changing. If the genes are controlling us and environments change, then we may not fit anymore. And then all of a sudden we'd all die out because whatever the gene programs are don't fit the environment. But no, we adapt continuously because the environment is adjusting our genes, and so that we are always staying in harmony with the environment, and that's how we stay alive. So the control isn't in the genes. Then you say, well, the environment, and then now we have to take a step, and here's where the step comes from. Yes, if you're an amoeba and you're in a pond, whatever conditions are in the environment, you're going to make a response to survive in that pond. So if the weather changes or whatever's in the water changes, the amoeba responds to that environment and changes its behavior. And I say, okay, well, our cells, and we're made out of 50 trillion cells, our cells are like amoebas. We have 50 trillion amoebas living in a community, and the shape of that community is your human body. So when you say, I'm an individual organism, I go, no, you're a community of 50 trillion amoebas that are working in a harmony and the community shape is your body. So we have amoeba cells, and they're going to respond to the environment. I say, yeah, but let's say you're a liver cell, and you're in the liver, and you're supposed to adjust your function to what's going on in the environment to stay alive. I go, but if you're a liver cell, how do you know what the heck is going on in the environment? You're inside. You have no idea what's going on in the environment. So I say, the nervous system, with all its senses, taste, smell, touch, pain, temperature, all these physical things, sight. These are the nervous system's ability to read the environment and then send the information to your community of cells so that they can coordinate their behavior to stay alive in the environment. So you have a different behavior if a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you than the behavior if you're sitting in a tree eating a banana. You got two different behaviors, but it's based on what was going on outside. So I say, why is it relevant? I say, so your liver cell is depending on your nervous system to send information about what the environment is about, so the liver cell can adjust the function to support the organism in whatever environment you find yourself in. I go, great, that's the function of the nervous system. I go, when we get up to the level of the nervous system of a human, between the environment and the body is the mind. And the mind does an interpretation of what's going on in the environment. So the cells in my liver, do they get the direct signal of what's going on in the environment? And I go, sometimes not, because if the interpretation in the mind looks at that signal, it can have different response to the same signal. Two people can be in the exact same environment and have two totally different behaviors based on how the mind is, each of their minds is looking at the world. No two people see the world exactly the same. So I say, why is it relevant? Because my liver cell is not now directly connected to the environment. My liver cell's behavior is directly connected to the interpretation that my mind is sending. And I go, oh my God. Well, interpretation is your belief. I go, yeah, and since the mind is sending the signals to the cells and the mind is creating the environment which controls the genes, then whatever the picture in the mind is, that's the signal that's being sent to the cells. And you say, well, why is that relevant? I go, well, if you have a picture of being sick, then the mind sends the signals to coordinate you to be sick. And if the mind sends a picture of you being well, then it sends the signals to the body to become well. And so the mind is adjusting the body to the picture that is in the mind. And then I go, because now we recognize that 70% or more of our thoughts look at the world in a very negative, disempowering, self-sabotaging way. And if we're controlling our biology with the picture we have in our mind, and our minds are sending these negative images, then our bodies become a complement to those negative images. And you can create a cancer just because you perceive it in your mind that you have a cancer. But you can also eliminate a cancer by changing the picture in your mind that caused that cancer. And all of a sudden you start to say, well, wait, my mind is creating an image of the universe in which I live. And that image is translated by the nervous system into chemistry, which controls epigenetics. So that my physical and behavioral and emotional biology is actually under the control of the picture in our mind. A picture of health, happiness, love, pain, war, peace. These are pictures. And I say, why is it relevant? Because when we put those pictures in the mind, the nervous system will translate them into chemistry, which then shapes the body to be a complement to that picture. And then I go back to the quote in nature. The universe is immaterial. It's mental and spiritual. Our mental and spiritual character is being shaped by the nervous system to express reality. And if we change our mental and spiritual character, how we handle it, then we change our lives. And all of a sudden, we conform totally to quantum physics when you consider that mind, spirit, consciousness represents an energy field, a field of invisible energy. That's what the field is. And I go, why is it relevant? And one more physics quote, and this from Albert Einstein, and it's like, it's so beautiful, because the quote from Albert Einstein is, the field, which is the invisible energy, consciousness, etc., the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. Particle meant physical reality. Field means energy, consciousness, and thought. So listen to it again. The field, the energy, the consciousness, the thought is the sole governing agency of the particle, matter, body, universe. And then all of a sudden you go back right to the quote of the physicist. Yep, it's all immaterial, but your consciousness, your mind, and your spirit are creating this world.
We're going to go on and talk a little bit more about this conscious, subconscious mind. But just while we're staying with this genetic, epigenetic story, I mean, thoughts are things, and those things are actual chemicals which attach to cells and cause genes to express themselves in a particular way. And is that the essence of this process of epigenetics? Rather than just being this victim, we actually have some control over how our genes express themselves.
We have almost absolute control over how genes express ourselves.
And while family history isn't all that relevant, it's a kind of disturbing to think, and I think I've read this correctly, that this epigenetic expression is actually inheritable.
Absolutely. Here's an interesting story. They looked at the fate of children that got adopted into families where there's a lineage of cancer running in the family. And they find that the adopted child will get the same family cancer with the same probability as any of the natural siblings. The whole issue is this: the adopted child came from totally different genetics. It wasn't the genes that were responsible for the cancer. It was growing up in the family and acquiring the programming and the beliefs of how to respond to life that were not in harmony with the world. And that disharmony in your biology, disharmony is expressed as disease. What was the point? Here's the point. Let me give a fact of science. Less than 1% of disease is due to genetic flaws. Listen again, less than 1% of disease is due to genetic flaws. I go, why is that relevant? It's like, well, then where the heck did the 90% plus of disease come from? And it goes back to consciousness. that we are creating our illnesses because of the stresses that we live under and our attitudes and beliefs of victim and pressures and the Darwinian belief of survival of the fittest in a competition for life. It's like, oh my God, we've been programmed to be these animals running in a maze, competing against each other so that we stay alive, that life isn't a beautiful, harmonious thing. According to that theory, life is a rat race, a struggle of competition. If you don't compete, you get lost and you die. And so everybody's out there trying to stay alive. And what was a garden? And I go, what's the relevance to the word garden? A garden, by definition, is a community in full cooperation. A garden is cooperation. There's no struggle in the garden. It's a cooperation. And the reality is, oh my God, we inherited a garden. And now, through our perception that this is a struggle for life and a competition for fitness, we turn that garden into we're destroying the garden. That's why we're facing an extinction.
The concept of survival of the fittest is one that actually sits comfortably in this scientific materialist world that you've described. But as you say, synergy and cooperation are something that's played a much bigger role in our evolution, isn't it? I mean, that's...
Well, yeah, now, Ron, it's recognized by science that cooperation has been left out of the equation and that it is the more dominant aspect of evolution is cooperation. You see, the whole idea of that survival of the fittest was actually not from Darwin. It was from a guy earlier, Thomas Malthus. And Malthus was like the leader in a philosophy called what was it? I'm trying to just all of a sudden remember the philosophy. It's like pessimism. That's what it was called. The philosophy of pessimism. I go, what do you mean? I go, well, he's the guy that said, look, plants, it's hard to get plants to continue producing more and more. You can work real hard. And let's say you're a farmer and you get a bushel of corn out of this field this year. And then you work really, really hard next year and you get 2 bushels of corn. So, oh, wow, you double the production. That's really cool. But then in the third year, you work really, really hard and you get an extra bushel. So now you have 3 bushels. And then the 4th year, you work harder and then you get 4 bushels. So every year you get 1 more bushel out of the land. And then he said, but animals, when they reproduce, double the population. So first you have 2 animals, then you have 4 animals, then you have 8, 16, 32. And I go, well, there's a problem. If the animals keep doubling, which is called geometric, but the food grows only 1 step at a time, arithmetically, that's the word, then it says there's a point where there's going to be too many animals and not enough food. That would be the simple conclusion. There's how many years of animals reproducing will they overproduce, and then there's going to be competition for food. And that was the concept that became part of the Darwinian theory, that the competition is this. There's not enough for everybody, and therefore you have to fight for your survival, and therefore that led to all this competition, and competition leads to violence, and violence leads to war. And look at the world that we created when it was based on this Malthus principle. And guess what? Scientifically invalid. Totally incorrect. Animals just reproduce the same population. So 2 parents produce 2 offspring. You go, yeah, let's say a clam has 1,000 eggs. And I go, yeah, and 998 of those eggs are going to die or be food for a higher organism. And so there's going to be 2 clams coming. 2 humans mate, and each family should end up with 2 offspring to replace the parents. That would be conventional science. And in fact, in the world of the West, Australia, U.S., Great Britain, Germany, it's actually 2 parents totally produce less than 2 offspring, that the population is getting a little smaller. But in poor countries, the population is increasing because they don't have what the West has, Social Security. Meaning if you get old in one of those poor countries, how are you going to survive? And the answer is you better have some kids that are going to be able to share with you what they're making. And in really poor countries, then you have to have more kids because each kid is not going to make that much either. And all of a sudden you start to see that our population problem is due to the fact that there's a built-in cultural understanding that if you get old and you can't take care of yourself, you're going to be on the street and you're going to die. And therefore, we have children, and children become Social Security.
Now, Bruce, let's move to a more positive note.
Yeah.
But I know that you've mentioned, particularly when we're talking about this epigenetics, talking about the conscious and the unconscious mind, and I know that you've written a lot about the fact that our conscious mind actually plays a surprisingly small part in our lives, which I guess leaves us with the subconscious mind. What can you talk to our listener a little bit about that dichotomy there, and what influences the subconscious mind? How can we change it to fulfill our potential?
Okay, first, a very simple analogy. I go to the Apple store and I buy a brand new iPod. And the iPod looks like an iPhone, and on the front is a touch screen where you can create a playlist and adjust the volume and the EQ and go fast forward. You can create using what is called the touch screen. So I buy a brand new iPod, take it out of the box, and on the touch screen I push play, and nothing happens. I go, oh my God, I just got ripped off. I paid all this money, and the damn thing isn't working. And then some little 7-year-old kid comes up to me and goes, hey, mister, you didn't download any music. If you don't download any music, you can't play. And it's like, oh, I got it. It's the memory. You got to put some programs in the memory so you can play. I go, yeah. So I go, okay, now take that analogy and look at it this way. The conscious mind is the touch screen. The subconscious mind is the program database. I say, if you are just born and you have no data in your subconscious, no programs, no how to behave, nothing, and I say, well, do something, and your conscious mind doesn't have any programs. It's just like the iPod. Nothing's going to happen. Why? Do what? So nature creates the first 7 years of a child's life where our memory gets downloaded with behavior because our brain in the first 7 years of our life is operating at a vibrational frequency less than consciousness in electrical and EEG, electroencephalograph, the reading of brain activity with wires on your head. The vibration that they read of a child under 7 is in a lower vibration than consciousness. It's called theta, and a higher vibration of brain activity, alpha, is where consciousness begins. So a child, for the first 7 years, the brain of a child is in theta. Well, theta is imagination. And of course, that's a character of children, where they can have an imaginary world and a real world. So they can play alone and have imaginary friends throughout the room and have a tea party and do everything. Or they can ride a broom and the mother says, give me the broom. And the child on the broom does not see that broom as a broom, but it sees it as a horse. And to that child in that imagination state of theta, it is a horse. So they mix the real world and imaginary world. But theta is also hypnosis. And the point about it is this. In the first 7 years of a child's life, the brain is functioning at hypnosis. It records everything it sees and hears. Why? Well, that's the data of how to behave in the family. How the father behaves, you learn that by observing your father. How the mother behaves, you watch your mother. And I say, well, what do you mean? Just watch them. I say, the brain is like a video camera. Whatever it sees, it's just recording it. There's no consciousness like a viewer to watch what's being recorded. Consciousness doesn't begin until around 7. So there's a problem. And the problem is this. The programs that are downloaded before age 7 can be good programs or bad programs, but your conscious mind isn't working, so it doesn't filter them out and make any difference. They're just recorded. So what are you recording? Other people's behavior. You're watching your father, you're recording how your father behaves in life. You watch your mother, you see how she behaves in life. Roles are established then. This is what a father does, this is what a mother does, this is what a sibling does. I say, how'd you get these programs? I say, first 7 years, just watch and download. And after you're age 7, consciousness kicks in. Now you can use that touch screen. Now you can use the programs and create and do things with the programs. You become more of a creator. But if there are no programs, conscious mind has no ability to create that way because there's nothing to create from. So 7 years is programming. It goes straight into the subconscious mind. The difference between conscious and subconscious is critical, and that is this. They don't have the same function and they don't learn in the same way, and that's where the disconnects come from. The function of the conscious mind is a creative mind, imagination. And the more consciousness an organism has, the more creative its life capabilities are. So you look at humans, it's like, look at God, we created a rocket and computers and all these things. I say, conscious mind's creativity. And I say, and what about subconscious? I go, oh, subconscious is habits. And people think, oh, the subconscious were evil stuff. I go, no, subconscious habits. And they're very good habits. For example, when did you learn how to walk? Oh, before you were 2? Have you had to relearn how to walk? No. My God. Well, you got a subconscious. Thank God. Why? Because if you had to wake up every day and try to remember how to walk, and you didn't have a program, you'd spend all day just learning how to walk and then go back to bed at night. And the simple reality is, yeah, programs are good when they support us, but we can also get programs that could sabotage our viability, our life, our desires, and our wishes. How did we get these programs that sabotage us? I go, we copied other people. If they have a defect, then we got a defect because we copied it. And they say, well, that's subconscious mind. I say, yeah, but after 7, you can use the conscious mind, creative mind, subconscious mind, habit mind. I go, after age 7, I can start being creative. And I go, absolutely. And you can, just like a computer, you got programs in the hard drive. Okay, that's subconscious. And then you could pull them up on the screen. And then you can edit and modify them and change them. And I say, oh, that's the creative conscious mind. What's on the screen is creative consciousness. What's in the hard drive is the habit. And I go, so what's the relevance? I go, as long as you're in the conscious mind, you're actually in a creative mode. And whatever your wishes and desires are, your nervous system is going to try to coordinate that output to express those. However, and this is the monkey wrench in the machine, and this is where all the problems come from, this one point. The conscious mind, imagine, the creative mind, can think. And I say, well, what's the issue with that? And I say, when it's thinking, by definition, the conscious mind stops paying attention to what's going on outside, because thinking is an inside job. If I say, what are you doing next Wednesday? The answer is not really written on the floor or anywhere around you. It's in your head. You have to go think. And I go, the moment you are thinking, you let go of the wheel. You're not driving the vehicle anymore. Conscious mind's driving the vehicle. Yeah. Where's it going? Toward your wishes and desires. I go, great. Then I say, yeah. But the moment you're thinking, you go to autopilot. I go, what's autopilot? I say, the subconscious, it's where the habits are. It knows how to walk, it knows how to drive the car, it knows how to talk, it knows how to do your job. Why? Because those things that you repeated over and over again become habits. So the point is simply this. When you are thinking, the creative mind lets go of the wheel, goes inside, and deals with a thought. The problem then is automatically the autopilot subconscious kicks in, and the behavior that the subconscious is going to use has been programmed not from you but by other people. So when you are thinking, you're not paying attention to what's going on, and you're automatically running from the program. And if the programs are good programs, great, because whether you're paying attention or not, a good program is going to lead to a good result. But if you got a program that is not a good program, and you're thinking, and that program begins to play, then guess what? You are sabotaging yourself, and your conscious mind has no awareness that you just did this. Ron, let me tell you a quick story that 30-some years of lecturing, same story. So why this is the most easy story. The story is this. Sometime during your development, you probably had a friend that you were very close to, and you knew your friend's behavior very, very well. And in this particular case, you also know your friend's parent. And one day you see that your friend has some of the exact same behavior as the parent. So, of course, you got to tell your friends. You go, hey, Bill, you're just like your dad. And then you back away from Bill. Bill will go ballistic and say, how the heck can you compare me to my dad? I'm nothing like my dad. And people start laughing in the audience because they've all had familiar kinds of experiences. And I say, this is a profound story, very profound in this regard. Everyone else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. The only one who doesn't see it is Bill. Explanation? Bill downloaded his dad's behaviors in the first 7 years. When does Bill play those subconscious programs? When he's thinking. So when Bill is thinking and the program is playing, It's not Bill's wishes and desires that are being manifest. It's the program that's being manifest. The negative things that he acquired during his development. And why is that relevant? Because Bill is unaware that this negative behavior is playing. And if it's sabotaging his life, then Bill is totally unaware that his own behavior has created the problem. So Bill is left with what to think. Oh my God, it didn't work. Oh, the universe is it's not in my cards to be happy, successful, healthy. It's not in my fate to be that way. I want to be healthy. I want to be wealthy. And I go, that's good, creative, conscious thinking. And I say, yeah, but if you're only using that 5% of the day, which is what science has recognized, then it says 95% of your life is not coming from your creative wishes and desires. It's coming from whatever you downloaded. And psychologists will tell you 70% or more of the downloaded programs that a child receives before age 7 are disempowering, self-sabotaging, and limiting beliefs.
So, Bruce, how do we do an audit of our subconscious mind?
Well, that's the real cool part because, Ron, when you ask that, you'd say, well, what program did I get when I was 0? What program did I get when I was 1? In fact, what program did I get even before I was born in the last trimester of pregnancy? And you say, well, how could I know? I wasn't conscious. I have no idea what the program is. So thanks for asking the question, Ron, because here's the thing. How do you know what your programs are? Because you weren't conscious when they were put in. And so the easy part is this. 95% of your life comes from the subconscious programs. The point is your life is a printout of your programs. Simple point. The things you like that come into your life, they come in because you have programs that support them being there. But this is the one. In contrast, the things you desire and wish for, but you have to work hard for, struggle, sweat over, put a lot of effort into it. My God, you're working so hard to make these happen. Why is it so difficult to get those things? And the answer is, inevitably, the subconscious doesn't support that being in your life. So 95% of the day, your subconscious is sabotaging your wish. Your wish is to be successful, and your subconscious probably has some program that says not deserving, not smart enough or something. And what will it do? 95% of the day create a behavior based on the program. And you will make mistakes, and you'll do stupid things, and you won't see it, except you'll see the result. It didn't work. I wanted to be successful. It didn't work. Oh, the universe is against me. And I go, no. 95% of the day, your own programs were shooting you in the foot. You have this bloody foot, and you look around like, who did it? And you don't even see the gun is in your own hand. that we are sabotaging ourselves, and we don't know it because our programs, the function of the mind is to take the program and turn it into reality. So if it's a program of a healing, placebo effect. A program. Doctor says, here's this pill that's going to heal you and gives you such a story about this amazing medication. And you say, okay, let me take the pills. And I go, oh, great. And you take the pill and you get well. And then you find out the pill is a sugar pill. I go, wow, what healed you? Obviously not the sugar pill. Your perception, your belief, your vision that taking this pill was going to lead to a healthy outcome. So the mind has a picture of what? Healthy outcome. And you take the pill, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, that's going to release healthy outcome. And guess what? You heal yourself, and the darn thing was a sugar pill. And so basically it says your positive thought about the pill healed you because that thought was then turned into behavior by the brain, and we healed ourselves. And people go, yeah, the placebos, that's like positive thinking healing. I go, yeah. Now let's switch this to the more important side that nobody talks about really, and that is, what about a negative thought? Because placebo is based on having a positive thought. What about a negative thought? This won't work. I can't do this. I have cancer. I'm not good enough or whatever. I say, these are negative thoughts. I say, what's the result? I say, equally powerful to the positive thought, but works in the opposite direction. A positive thought can heal you from cancer. You can have remission with a positive thought. A negative thought can cause the cancer. So negative thoughts are equally powerful, and we don't recognize that the vast majority of our thoughts are negative. And as a result, we don't realize that our own thinking is manifesting a reality that the brain will manifest chemistry to complement that reality. That chemistry controls the genetics, which then our behavior is going to be influenced by what you were thinking. Positive thinking, the chemistry of healing is released. Negative thinking, the stress chemicals are released, and the negative thinking is responsible for up to 90% of doctor visits. So
this audit of the subconscious mind, it involves obviously quite a deal of reflection, and not always possible. I mean, this is part of the power of relationship and communication, and actually maybe even therapy at times, is this reflection on your past and identifying these subconscious traps.
Absolutely. Your whatever your subconscious program, the life you were experiencing is a printout of your subconscious. So basically, it says if there's happiness, the subconscious is acknowledging whatever out there is giving you happiness. But if there's struggle, it says the subconscious is not supporting that destination, and you're trying to override the program that's working 95% of the day with a mind that's only working 5% of the day. That's where the difficulty comes in. But and to simplify this, that we've been programmed, and that these programs are a problem. The movie The Matrix is like listed as science fiction, but the movie The Matrix is a documentary. Everybody's been programmed. That's the first thing. And let me emphasize this. The idea of being programmed is not a new idea. The Jesuits, for 400 years, have stated, give me a child until it is 7 and I will show you the man. They stated exactly what we just said. You're programmed for 7 years, and whatever that program is, 95% of your life is going to express that program. So whatever they program you with in the first 7 years will manifest as the experiences you will have in your life. That they've been saying that for 400 years. That's a true story.
Oh, yes. And how do we change that? Okay, I mean, once we've identified it, the challenge now is, should you choose to accept it, this isn't mission impossible.
Yeah, well, it's mission very possible, but you have to know how to do it. And this is where the problem comes from. The problem is that we didn't separate the two conscious and subconscious minds into separate interdependent minds. Each mind learns in a different way, and each mind functions in a different way. And we grouped them, the mind. So if all of a sudden I say, that's a negative behavior, I don't want to do that anymore. And I go, great, the conscious mind just said, don't do this anymore. And I say, did the subconscious mind hear that or change? And the answer is absolutely not. It doesn't even learn that way. So the result is, we keep trying to adjust our lives by saying, well, I won't do this anymore. And then you find yourself doing it again. I go, well, that's what a habit's all about. You let go of the control and the habit will kick right back in again. So you want to change the subconscious mind. I go, yeah, but the two minds are different in this regard. The function of the conscious mind, we mentioned earlier, is creativity. Whatever you can imagine and desire and wish is a picture in the conscious mind. I go, yeah, great. It's creative. And when it's driving the vehicle, you create the pictures in your mind. And that's where the story of the Matrix comes in. It says, you've been programmed, and your life is a program. You'll wake up every day, and you'll start to go through the same tracks, the same things, day after day after day, and they don't seem to change, and the same issues you have follow you all the time, and that's being in the program. Then it said, but if you take the red pill, you get out of the program. I go, that's pretty cool. I say, well, what would it be like to take the red pill? Then I go, interestingly enough, most people have taken the red pill and didn't realize it, but had the profound consequences. And I say, well, what was that? And I say, falling in love for many people. It doesn't have to be, falling in love is not the only way of doing this, but falling in love is many people's lives are characterized by a period of falling in love. I say, well, what does that mean? I say, well, your life could suck every day until you met person X, the one you're going to have a relationship with. You meet person X, you fall in love almost instantly. Your life is changing. 24 hours later, you have a completely different life. It's called the honeymoon. The honeymoon is what? God, life is beautiful. It's heaven on earth. The food tastes great. The music sounds better. You feel better. Even the lousy job you do is not so lousy anymore. Everything is like, God, it's got a glow on it. It's so beautiful. I go, how did the blah, blah, blah life in 24 hours turn into heaven on earth? And the answer was, scientists recognize that falling in love is one of the characteristics that stops the programming and we stay mindful. Being mindful, that's like a Buddhist process of keeping your conscious mind present. Because I say, well, why is the subconscious mind running the show? And I say, because when the conscious mind's thinking, the autopilot subconscious kicks in. I go, well, what if the conscious mind stops thinking? I go, oh, well, then it's continuously running the show. The autopilot doesn't kick in. So it turns out when people fall in love, it's a time period where they stay mindful. They stop thinking and they start being at that moment, not letting go of being in the moment. I go, yeah, of course. You just met someone you love. This is not time to be thinking, going in your head and letting go. This is time to be full out here and enjoy what you got right in front of you. So we stop thinking. I said, well, what happened when you stop thinking? I said, your life was blah, blah, blah. You meet this person 24 hours later, you stop thinking, the equivalent of the red pill. And I say, then what? Well, now your creation is not coming from the subconscious mind, it's coming from the creative conscious mind. I said, what'd you create? Honeymoon, heaven on earth. I go, Jesus, it was always available to you, but the moment you cut back into the subconscious mind, that image is going to disappear. So the honeymoon has a lifespan to it based on different people, how long you can stay mindful. The longer you stay mindful, the less you default to the subconscious programs, which are negative. But the moment you start thinking a lot is the moment those negative programs show up, and they spoil the honeymoon and the relationship, because a lot of those negative programs, they don't play when you're in your conscious mind. They only play when you let the subconscious autopilot kick in. And all of a sudden, when these negative programs show up, that's when the honeymoon starts to taper off. You could still be in love with somebody, but the juicy joy of heaven on earth that was so exquisite in the beginning of that love affair sort of disappears, and then it becomes regular life. Why? Well, you kick back into the program again. So what is the result of not playing the program? Well, manifesting heaven on earth. And all of a sudden it's like, well, that would be the intention. I go, well, that was what we were here for. I say, and then how come it's not heaven on earth? I say, because the programs that were downloaded into us in 7 years set us up to run a rat race with competition, violence, kill the other guy before he kills you, very negative view of the world of struggle and fight and illness. And we put those programs in and then run those 95% of the day. And then you look around and say, yep, that's the world we have. Because if everyone was in love at this one moment, then the world would not have war. It would be in harmony and balance, and would be heaven on earth. Because if everyone was creating heaven on earth simultaneously, then exactly that would be what would be manifesting in our world today.
Yeah. Now, Bruce, we've covered so much territory here, and it's always so great to talk to you. I wanted to just finish with this, and taking a step back from everything you do. What do you think the biggest challenge for people today is on their health journey through life?
The biggest challenge is they perceive themselves as victims, that they see that I give up control of my health to the medical profession, which is actually not the real one you're giving up to. You're giving up to the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is a corporate entity that makes money by telling you you're a victim, and that if you buy their drugs, you're gonna be okay. And it turns out that is the biggest sham in the world. It's a money-making organization. And in fact, while pharmaceutical agencies do have wonderful miracle drugs, they don't really sell them to the public for a simple reason. If you heal somebody, they're no longer a customer. So they don't really sell healing drugs. They just keep you strung on to come back to the next prescription and the next one and the next one. So we've been disempowered. We've been disempowered by our culture, our programming, and we've been disempowered by people who know the truth, because that we look at the world, Ron, and there are very powerful people out there, and you go, wow, how'd they get all that power? And then the joke is, everyone is equally powerful. I say, yeah, but how can Bill Gates get $60 billion and I have trouble, buying a cappuccino? And the issue is, well, how did you not have power? And I said, because you've been systematically disempowered with programming from the last trimester of pregnancy through the first 7 years, again, because the leadership of the world, as the Jesuits knew, also know that I can program you in the first 7 years. And if I program you to be a victim to the medical community, not the medical community, or the pharmaceutical community, actually, and have you believe it, then by behavior and habit, you will continue to follow through and keep buying those prescription drugs when you could have healed yourself if you had a different perspective on who you really are. You're not a victim of your genes. You're a creator and master of your genes, your behavior, and your emotions. But if you don't believe it because of the programming running 95% of the day, then guess what? You become the victim. And that was the intention for most of that programming, taking away a person's spirit, saying, no, I'm your religion. Pay me the money and we'll talk to God for you. And it's like, each one of us is a spirit, and that spirit is connected to God. There's no way that we can be separated from this energy. And once you see a possible separation, then you start to say, well, how much do I have to pay to get back in the game? And then you gave up your power at that moment. And the fact is, the fact is we are all connected to spiritual God, and there's no way you could ever be disconnected from it. And it's a reprogramming thing. It's just saying, I see the negative programmings, I'm living the negative programs, and I can take those programs and turn them around and make them positive programs that match the wishes and desires. And I go, what would be the simple conclusion? What would be the result if you programmed your subconscious mind to have all the programs that your conscious mind sees as wishes and desires? And then comes the fun answer, and the answer is this. It'll be heaven on earth whether you're conscious or not paying attention at all. Because if your subconscious has those same programs, then without you even paying attention, you would always be ending up in heaven on earth without even trying to do it. And that's the exciting part, because if you do reprogram, you get your power back. If you don't reprogram, you are the expression of a program, and a program that was not put in by yourself.
Bruce, what a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Ron, I am so happy to be here with you, and thank you for this opportunity. And I just really hope that people really get the nature of, as the quantum physics, the most profound science reveals, that the world that we're experiencing is due to our mental and our spiritual characteristics. We are controllers of our own mental and spiritual characteristics. Therefore, we are not victims. We are creators. Just unfortunately, we gave the programs over to parents and community in the first 7 years, and they propagated their problems from generation that they received from their parents, and et cetera. So I want to thank you, because if people fully get what we're talking about, then the effort is, what if you want to have a honeymoon every day of your life? And the answer is reprogramming. And that is so very important to be doing.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Ron.
See, now I told you when we started, a powerhouse, knowledgeable, passionate, empowering. As I also mentioned, he has written several books. I mentioned The Biology of Belief, the byline of which is Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter, and Miracles. His other book, Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future and a Way to Get There from Here. And The Honeymoon Effect, the science of creating heaven on earth. I mean, the book names tell a story on their own. I also love this idea that I think we all need reminding of, and I think it's basic, yet it is so profound. It's a formula that captures the world we inhabit. Matter plus energy equals structure. We think the world we see is just matter. We can sort of acknowledge that it's a collection of atoms, and that's almost as far as our brain lets us go. Now, don't blank out on me here. I'm not going to try and explain quantum physics, but just because I can't explain it so that you, and for that matter I, can understand it, it doesn't mean that it's not real. It is real. And so learning how to use this energy that surrounds us is, in a positive way, is a very powerful force. Now, this episode has been a kind of a philosophical quantum level of the episode we did a few weeks ago, episode 27 with Dr. Susie Green, The Power of Positive Thought. This is taking that concept to a whole new subanatomical level. Doing an audit of your conscious mind is an interesting exercise. I mean, after I spoke with Bruce, I tried to think of all the things in my life that I could consider positive and negative about myself. I know that will disappoint some of my listeners, but I'm not perfect. There it is. I've said it. It's out there. And sure enough, I could reflect on characteristics about strengths and weaknesses that people very close to me may have had, or significant events that occurred that I could remember when I was growing up. Now, my memory goes back to 3 or 4 years old. Remember what he said, give me the child at 7 and I'll show you the adult. So in order to reflect on those first 4 years prior to my memory, I guess we only have those close to us, their own characters, if you like, as best as we understood them, to reflect on and think about what influence they had on our subconscious. We touched on this theme in that other great episode I did with Dr. Shankadev Saraswati, episode 13, Mind and Body Connection. There's just so much to think about. We will, of course, have links to Bruce's website. He lectures and runs workshops live and online all around the world, and I spoke to him about the possibility of bringing him out to Australia in 2019. Well, I hope we can do that. So, until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult